Well, good afternoon and welcome everybody. My name is Terry Jaffe. I'm the Senior Supervisor of Cultural Programs here at Native Child Family Services of Toronto. And I'm so happy to be with you all today for the third part in our ongoing webinar, Decolonizing Child Welfare Learning Series. Today we're going to be talking about ongoing, and it's a follow-up to our conversation that happened in December around intake and assessment. We've got some guest speakers today, Dr. Jeffrey Schiffer, Jamie Taguri, Mark Atanasoff, Miguel Torres. But first I want to introduce traditional knowledge keeper Vivian Roy. Vivian is a strong Anishinaabe Kwe from Wimikong. And Vivian, hi. Just like to ask you in a good way to open this meeting.
Aha. Abos webne do giwet no kwe vision kango. Main gando dem minawi kong do de bendagos mampisi go Toronto don jinaki mina do da megwa. Showem do kwech mego nangwa with not mojang. Women a madziang. Mina women a kiang. Not motionang showem do. Women a gigdang. Mina women on mang. Na kinagondak mampie nam the bot not moge noge we minamadziat. Creator, I asked you today to help us today so we can speak well and that we can hear well and that we can give our words with good intent. And I also ask that from all participants that are sitting in the circle today to help us live in a good way and to work in a good way. And with that, I want to say Chimigwech. That is our opening.
Vivian, thank you. Just want to say hello to everybody that's joining us. You know, being in Zoom webinar, I can't see everybody, but I do notice in our list of attendees quite a number of familiar faces and then some new folks. So welcome. Glad you're with us today. I want to now turn it over to Jeffrey. Hello, Jeffrey. How are you?
Good afternoon. I just want to thank everybody for joining us. I'm Jeff Schiffer. I'm the Executive Director at Native Child and Family Services of Toronto. This is our third installment of the learning series, but it's been almost 5 months since we started this journey on September 30th, making new commitments to community to work together with our staff and community members who access our services and stakeholders to start communicating the work that's happened at Native Child since 2004 when we took on the mandate. To really decolonize the practice of child welfare within the Toronto jurisdiction, sort of using that as a foundation in our continued work to build on our strengths and continue to change the system together. I think I'm really excited today because we have some staff that have been with Native Child for quite some time who sort of live and breathe child and family well-being from an Indigenous perspective, who work on a daily basis to support children and their families in ways that are grounded in Indigenous values and that work to implement the service model that we received through 4 days of ceremony at Native Child more than 30 years ago. So before I pass things over, I just want to say that today is going to be about sharing what child and family well-being practice looks like within the context of an ongoing investigation at Native Child right now. Understanding that we have to work within these imperfect structures that we inherited from the province, right? These time frames and these structures and these tools that we inherited along with the mandate that were really never vetted by or created with the Indigenous community. You're going to hear how our staff are challenged by those on a daily basis, how they move around them in flexible ways to still be able to do their work in ways that centers the well-being of children, reflects the voices of people involved in that process, and works to achieve the best outcomes possible. As we continue to move through these webinars, these learning series, you're going to continue to see each incremental part of our practice unpacked. And that will then lead to a larger discussion on September 30th, when we not only showcase the work as it exists right now, but make some commitments about continued work to build on those strengths and further decolonize the system together. So I think with that, I'll turn things back over to you, Terry, so that we can hear from some of the folks doing this work on a daily basis. Miigwech.
Jeff, thank you. So just to let people in the audience know, we are going to have a few guest speakers. We're going to be sharing some slides. There's lots of information to take in, and we will make time for Q&A at the end. If you're not familiar with Zoom webinar, you'll see a button at the bottom. It says Q&A. You can type your question in that, and then we'll gather up all the questions and answer them at the end of the presentation. So welcome again, Decolonizing Child Welfare Learning Series. It's so hard not to read it when you see it on the screen. But I want to introduce now Miguel Torres, a child and family wellbeing worker on the high-risk infant team. Miguel didn't send me a bio, but I will say that he's a wonderful man. That's what I know about Miguel. He's a kind, caring man, really supportive of community. And there he is. Welcome, Miguel.
Thank you, Terry. I appreciate that. And I apologize for not being able to send you a bio, but thank you for the kind words, and good afternoon to everybody who is participating in this webinar. And I'm so very thankful to have the opportunity to be a part of this. I think it's a very important thing that we are doing here at Native Child. And so I'm happy to share some of my experience as a child and family wellbeing worker. As Terry mentioned, I've been in child welfare for 10 years now, and I started my career in child welfare at Native Child. I was here for about 3.5 years on the high-risk infant team. And then I left Native Child to pursue an opportunity at the Children's Aid Society of Toronto as an intake worker. And I was there for about a year before I realized how much I missed doing the work with the community and the families at Native Child. And I actually came back to Native Child, and I've been here ever since. And as Terry mentioned, I'm working on the high-risk infant team, and it's a very special team here at Native Child where we work with families and children who are under the age of 2. So that being said, what I'm gonna start off with is I wanna give a little bit of a recap on the last webinar session, which focused on child and family wellbeing intake and assessment services that was presented by Tim Brell and Michelle. And what they did is they guided all of you through the processes of our work from initial referral. So when a call comes into Native Child, and what happens from the referral to the conclusion of that investigation or assessment. In their presentation, they talked about how both assess risk and provide supportive services to families and children in our community, and how Native Child uses the eligibility spectrum to help us determine whether the original concerns that were reported when a referral comes in are actually verified or not verified by the intake workers and the supervisors. We actually spoke about a fictional example, which consisted of a mother and her 18-month-old child. And the initial referral talked about the child being left unsupervised. It said that the neighbor had called and reported that the child had been crying for over an hour, and they did not believe that any adults were actually in the apartment. The neighbor reported that the child had been crying for more than an hour, and that she went to the door to knock to see if anyone was there, and found that there was no answer. Once the investigation began, our intake worker found that the mother was in fact at home with her 18-month-old child, but was very intoxicated and clearly unable to safely care for her young child. You will remember that rather than move immediately to the conclusion that the child needed to be removed from her home and placed in care, our intake worker first engaged with mom to explore who there might be in her support system or social network who could be connected to help with mom and the child. We ended up working with mom to learn about her extended family or any friends who could come and help. She may have an aunt or a sister that we could call to come to assume care of the child in the home and take the child and the mother to their home while mother worked on her recovery. The goal was to move the child to a place of safety within the family unit and to follow up to assess what support the mom might need to resume caring for her baby on her own. This is also the first opportunity that we have as an intake worker to connect mom with our holistic healing services and to facilitate beginning to build a safety network around mom and the child. And I just wanted to take a quick moment to touch on the holistic healing services. So at Native Child, along with our Child and Family Wellbeing team, we have several teams that work with families on a supportive level, anywhere from Nanoches to case managers on the Tikanagan team. We have a healing lodge for mothers. We have various transition houses. So we do take the opportunity at the intake level to also connect our families with the various support services and holistic services that we have. And we often engage and consult with those supportive services before going out when we get an initial referral. So for example, if we receive a call where there is intimate partner violence within a home, we do have intimate partner violence workers who are available to child and family wellbeing workers on a daily basis. And we would consult with them. And there have been times where those workers have come out with the child and family wellbeing worker to offer support to the family while we are completing our assessment and investigation. At the conclusion of the investigation, the intake worker and supervisor, as I mentioned earlier, will use the eligibility spectrum to help determine if the family case would be kept open for ongoing services. In the case of the mom and her 18-month-old child, based on what we discovered at our safety assessment, we would likely verify the original concern that the child was left unsupervised. And we would also verify that the caregiver did struggle with substance misuse that would compromise her ability to safely care for her child without the support from her family and the community. Each of these circumstances is described in the eligibility spectrum, and they are assigned a specific code, which is a reason why the situation would be moved to ongoing services. When concerns are verified at the end of the investigation assessment, a case becomes eligible to remain open for ongoing longer-term services at Native Child. And it's also, I think it's important to note that we do consult with our supervisors, and we consult with the support service and the holistic team in order to talk about if the file should be moved to ongoing services. It's also important to note that not all cases where there are original concerns are verified, and not all cases are actually kept open for ongoing services. A concern with a family could be verified, but sufficient safety interventions for ongoing healing and prevention can be established and placed in the home where the file does not need to stay open for protection. However, if we believe that more needs to be done after our initial involvement at the intake and assessment level, either to ensure a child's safety or to ensure that a family is sufficiently supported safely, we can ensure that the longer term, and we will keep the case open for ongoing services. So as I mentioned earlier, I did have the opportunity to work as an intake worker, both at Native Child and at Children's Aid Society of Toronto. And I can say from personal experience that I have gone out on several investigations with families where we were able to mitigate the risk and ensure that the child or children were safe by connecting the family with extended family and connecting the family with support services, so that we were able to actually close the file at the intake and assessment level. And we were able to leave the family with support services and with a safety plan with their family and external supports to ensure that the file can stay closed while the family was continuing to follow their safety plan. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Miguel. Really so great to kind of hear more about what you do, what your team does, and to kind of follow the story that we introduced last month. I'm going to welcome now Jamie Tuguri. Jamie is a Child and Family Wellbeing Supervisor. He's been with Native Child and Family Services for about 30 years. And Jamie, welcome.
Well, thanks, Terry. 30 years sounds like a long time.
It looks like it's been a long time too.
Well, I know I shaved this morning. That just happened. No, but yeah. So when I first started at Native Child, I helped develop the youth program that we have, and it was through that youth program that I listened to many of the stories of those street youth about where they came from and what they knew and all those things. And we found out that probably 85%, 90% of those youth that we worked with were a result of a adoption breakdown, or they had lots of CAS involvement when they were kids or babies. So I really learned what if we don't do child and family well-being work in the right way, then it can be very devastating. And so we try to really try to do things the right way. And just to tag on to what Miguel said there, I've had calls before from sibling agencies and saying, do you really need to do an investigation on this? The family's working with, or the mom's working with us, and there's no concerns or issues. And I say, send me an email with that and we can close. So that's a bit different than what you'll see at other children's aids, I believe. And we take that, and so that's just, working with the community, working with community sibling agencies, and with our own support services. So it's good. At Native Child, when we determine that a family needs to be open for longer term services, the file usually stays with the same worker that did the initial safety assessment and investigation services. The exception is when the initial investigation was assigned to one of our immediate response workers or urgent cases that need to be investigated within 12 to 24 hours. I'll stop right there. I'll just explain that on those immediate response cases, it usually has to do with physical abuse, serious neglect, and sexual abuse. And it has to deal with, we have to get out there right away to ensure that the child is safe. It could be like a child says, I'm too scared to go home. I don't want to go home. Tells a teacher that. I don't want to go home to my mom and dad, or I don't want to go home to wherever. I'm worried that they're going to hurt me or whatever. And so then we need to send a worker out. But here at Native Child, our child and family well-being workers are what we call generalists. So they do the investigation and they carry the ongoing file if it decides to stay open. The times that it needs to be transferred is when the immediate response worker does an investigation and needs to be transferred to another worker. And when we do that, we want to make sure that there is no disruptions in services to the family or the child. So we do that in the way in which we get a worker who's going to be transferred to, but the worker who did the investigation will continue to work with that family. So we try to, and so these requirements, what has to happen here is that the worker, the supervisor, and the other transferring worker, or the worker that files will be transferred to, and that supervisor, they'll meet and they'll have a discussion about where we go from here. And then those two workers should come out to the family's home to do what we call a transfer meeting. And at that home, at that meeting, what really happens is the family meets with the workers and they talk about maybe the referral, but why we're involved and what the concerns are, and things like, well, what can the family do to alleviate some of those concerns, as well as the introduction of the new worker. And then after that, the new worker has to develop what we call a service plan, which is there's a bunch of recordings in child and family wellbeing that we are mandated to do from the ministry. So one of them is called a service plan. And a service plan can be done pretty easily. It can be done like the worker could just simply say, well, this is what you need to do. And to alleviate the concerns. But what we choose to do is ask the family what they can do to alleviate the concerns. And it's at this time we may have like what we call an original talking circle, where we invite the whole family in, their supports and whoever else they want. And here's what the problem, here's the concerns we have. How can the family support each other, and what can be done to alleviate some of these concerns? And then we develop a service plan from there. And in doing so, like the family and the workers are much more committed to the ongoing service and getting things done rather quickly, so we can close the file, decide to close the file. I'm sure I'm jumping all over the place here, but I hope Mark's not cringing right now. But however, in most cases, because most referrals are not coded for immediate response, most times it's the worker who does the investigation, the safety assessment, will make a decision with their supervisor to continue to move it to ongoing services, and they'll be a worker, really. So when the case goes to ongoing services, the focus remains on protecting children and engaging families in services and other community supports in order to reduce the likelihood of future harm to a child. Like investigation services, ongoing services are also provided in accordance with standards that come with having a provincial child welfare mandate. The intent of the standards is to ensure that a collaborative and respectful assessment of the family's strengths and needs is done and a service plan developed to reduce risk to the children. It is intended that engagement with the family is undertaken on a continual basis during the provision of ongoing services to ensure the children are safe and to provide support to the family. So it's at this point, like, this is when the original talking circle is really beneficial. And it really, and if you're, anybody can request original talking circle. So it's beneficial because the family's voice is heard, and it's heard in a traditional way, which we must listen to, and we must respond to that and respect those decisions made in that circle, and we must move forward with that. And we can hold each other in a way accountable to that plan. So if the worker is supposed to do something, if the worker is supposed to make a referral, let's say, to our Decolonizing program and hasn't done so, then we can hold, and the community members can hold that worker accountable to that and ask, why hasn't that been done yet? And we have to follow up. We have to do it. The standard promotes the engagement of the family during the assessment, service planning, and decision-making process. Emphasis is placed on ensuring the family understands the child protection concerns, the outcomes of all assessments, what their child protection or the child and family wellbeing worker and all other participating in the service plan will do to resolve the child protection concerns, and how the family's progress will be measured. For the small number of cases where a child has been brought into care for their safety, there is also a continuous focus on the child's need for a safe, stable, reliable, and permanent placement, preferably with the child's own family. And when that happens, we really, even prior to that happening, we really try to look for family. We connect or kin or friends. We connect if there's a First Nations. We try to connect with the First Nations to find out if there's family there or anybody there that can look after the child or children. And we've had quite a bit of success with this. And we've had kids, go back home and back to their own home communities, live with family, live with friends, and we've reconnected family that they never knew they had family in those situations. And at the same time, that allows the mom and dad to continue with their healing journey, right? It allows them to take care of some of the traumas and whatever issues they're challenged with. So that's really beneficial because, again, we have these standards, timeline standards, where kids can't be in care for this long or this, that, and that. So, and it's really difficult, as Jeffrey was saying at the beginning, that it's difficult for us to work within these standards, but we try to find ways, and we try to find ways, loopholes, and we try to, just do things a little differently to move it along. So, but that's the important part. We have a whole, and I know the next series you'll listen to the family finders, but we get family finders involved, and they find family all over the world, believe it or not, in the US, West Coast, East Coast, up north, all over the place. And it's so beneficial for us. So, because our one goal is to keep kids with family and their First Nations. And that's one of my goals, is because I've seen, what has happened to these youth that lost their sense of identity, lost their sense of who they are as an Indigenous person, where they're from, if they're from Grassy Narrows or where they're from, and they don't learn that. And so we really want to make sure that these kids learn this information, learn where they come from. They're going to have a better outcome in life later on. If there have been changes to any of the safety issues identified during the investigation or in the ability of the intervention put in place to ensure safety, the Child and Family Wellbeing worker will, together with the family, develop an alternative plan. For the day we determine that a family's files should remain open, our Child and Family Wellbeing teams work to help families make changes or access supports so that child and family wellbeing services are no longer needed. An assessment of the family's and child's strengths and needs is completed in every case receiving ongoing protection services before the development of the service plan. An assessment tool called the Family and Child Strengths and Needs Assessment is required under the provincial standard. And the completion of the tool and planning with the family are done within set timelines. The results of the family and child strengths and needs assessments are discussed with the family during the service planning process. And that could really be the original talking circle, where we really look for the strengths and the needs of the family through the family themselves. The families are the experts of themselves at the end of the day, right? So we look for that. And then we develop a nice service plan that everybody can agree to. When we work with a family, we develop a service plan in collaboration with the family. We include the child, family, and a circle of supports chosen by the family and child themselves. We work to help the family build their own support networks, as well as many referrals to our own culture-based healing and prevention services and other services in the community that may be needed. In planning services, we include all immediate family members, relatives, extended family, community members, and service providers from our own services or from mainstream systems. We also include a band representative whenever possible or another Native community representative. I think it's so important that and it's a strong mandate for us to always communicate with the First Nations, to really communicate and get their feedback and understanding, and to ask them for help in planning for their families, really, and their children. And I do know some First Nations are really wanting their kids to come back home because they want their kids to know where they're from and participate in the cultural activities and ceremonies, even if it's hunting and fishing and all those things, right? To get to understand who they are, because they also know that there's greater success for those kids then. So the standard for initial service plan requires that we set specific goals, objectives, and activities, including persons responsible and timeframes for completion. A specific plan level of contact by the Child and Family Wellbeing worker with the child who has been determined to be in need of protection and his or her caregivers. So this gets back to our home visits. So if you have a family who has a child 2 or younger, the worker is supposed to come to the home once every week. And that's based on our own high-risk infant policy. But that doesn't necessarily mean we have to do that. We can deviate from that one time per week. And that's a discussion that the worker has with the supervisor along with the family. And we have to listen to why, and why we need to do that or why the family wants that. There could be other services going in. There could be a Decolonizing worker going in, which means we don't need to go in and really bombard the family with our presence, right? So, but most times it's at least once a month. Minimum of once a month home visit should occur. And during that home visit, the Child and Family Wellbeing worker needs to meet with the family, mom and dad privately, have a discussion, meet with the kids privately, and have a look at the home environment. And so that's got to be done, and we should be doing that with the utmost respect. And we have to be respectful of people's homes and their own privacy. And we, that's our job, and we need to do that. We need to show people the respect. Sometimes we need to go to schools to talk to the kids privately, just to make sure everything's, what's been going on. And it also, Miguel and I were talking just prior to this, every situation is a unique situation for us. So it always depends on what happens. And we don't want to lump everything into, well, this is the way it is, this is what we're going to do. No, we want to hear from the family that supports, then we devise what the plan is. That's the important part. There are also occasions when the standards require that we make unannounced visits to the family home. Sometimes this is just because it's not possible to contact the family to arrange an appointment. But other circumstances related to a child's safety include when the perpetrator of abuse is not supposed to be in the home, but we have reasons to believe that the perpetrator is in fact getting access to the child. When it is necessary to assess the child's living condition without the family having opportunity to modify any of its usual conditions, or if in consultation with the supervisor it is determined that the unannounced visits are necessary to address the child's safety based on specific circumstances of the file, the case. Just on that, I'll make a couple comments. We really don't like to do unannounced visits. We always like to call, plan ahead, let you know when let the community members know, the families know when we're coming. Sometimes, though, we may not be able to connect with the family for whatever reasons. It could be a month we haven't connected. So sometimes the worker just goes and shows up and sees if the family's still there and find out what the issues are. Well, how come we're not connecting? Like, what's going on, right? Are you mad at me? Are you upset with us? Or is there something else happening? So that's usually why we do unannounced. When it comes to a perpetrator of abuse that should not be in the home, on occasion we will do that. If somebody calls us and says we think that person's in the home and is frequently in the home, then sometimes we may need to do that. But we try not to do that. We try to respect the community members and their families and just let them know when we're coming. I do know we even do that I'm sure they talked about this previously about investigations. We do call families and say, hey, listen, we got a referral. I need to come out and see you. When can you meet? So we do that. Just to let you also know, every case, every child and family wellbeing file will be reviewed a minimum of one time every 6 weeks. Sorry, one time every 6 weeks. So the supervisor must have supervision with their workers on every one of their files, one time every 6 weeks. I can let you know that happens a lot more than one time every 6 weeks. So usually it's a daily or weekly conversation with workers. And every 6 months, ongoing cases are formally reviewed by the worker and supervisors using standard risk assessment tools, including a risk reassessment tool, an assessment of the family and child's strengths and needs. If the file involves a family with a child in care, a reunification assessment is also completed, which includes a reassessment of risk, an assessment of the quality and frequency of access, and an assessment of safety of the environment to which the child is being returned. The need for reunification efforts or an alternative permanent plan if reunification is not safe. The service plan for the family is also updated with the involvement of the family. When we work with family, we make sure to involve extended family members, relatives, or other family support persons, including a representative chosen by the child's band. Particularly where there is a child in care, we work to conduct a thorough, continuous search for persons who may be committed to participation in a permanent plan for the child if it is not safe to return a child to their parent or caregiver. Wherever possible, we work to ensure the child is placed with a family who is willing to work cooperatively with the child's parent towards reunification, but is also willing to become the child's permanent family if needed. So, that's a really important part of our work. I can't stress that again, is to really get family involved at all stages. And if a child's in care, then we really need to get the family and the First Nations community involved to get that child out of care, get that child with kin or band member or friend or somebody. So that's really important. The other issue is, the other one is sometimes we need to go to court. We don't like to go to court. I don't like to go to court. I don't like to go to court because I don't like to, disclose all this information to the courts and say all these things. I rather work with people. But at times, for myself, because we're the high-risk infant, we have situations where babies are born highly addicted and remain in hospital for a month, 4 to 8 weeks. And at times, those parents leave and don't come back. And it's difficult. And I don't hold that against the parents. I understand where they're coming from, what they're going through, and they leave. So we need to go to court. We need to get this into court. At the same time, we need to connect with the First Nations. We need to find family. We need to do all these things, which we have done, and we have done. We found grandmothers that initially say, no, I'm too old. I want to have access, but I'm too old to do this long term. At the end of the day, the grandma accepts responsibility and takes that child into her home. So we know that that child is going to be raised with family. So that's really important for us to do, especially with the First Nations right now. Many First Nations are actively being involved in all these, which is great to see, and finding places and being involved with us. So we really don't like to go to court, but at times we have to. And it also depends on the severity of if it was a physical abuse or neglect or sexual abuse, and how much further we can get forward to get through those issues. Sometimes parents choose not to want to do that, and they want to go to court. So that's what ends up happening. So the decisions to close the family file is also subject to provincial standards. Here we go with the standards again, right? So the decision to terminate child protection services is made based on observable changes in behavior and family functioning, which indicates a low risk of future child protection concerns. The standard emphasizes that closing a family's file should be a process of transition in which we gradually decrease the intensity of intrusive intervention, and the family gradually assumes full responsibility for the safety and well-being of its children using their own resources and support network. Before closing a file, the child protection worker reviews the case with the family, community, and agency service providers, the family support network, and the supervisor. The decision to terminate provisions of the child and family wellbeing services is made by the worker in consultation with the approval of supervisor. So here, really, in this situation, before we close the file, we have a meeting. It's always good to have a family meeting with them. I always think it's good to really provide feedback to the family, the band, especially when it's very positive feedback and the family moves on. But we also must notify all collateral services, doctors, that we're connected with doctors to let them know we've closed the file. And First Nations, we need to let them know that we're closing. So there's a lot of people we need to let know. The other thing is, as Miguel said earlier, we may close early because we feel quite comfortable that, mom and dad are accessing support services and are attending and looking after all their personal challenges. And they may not have overcome them all, but we feel quite comfortable that those support services are going to be working with them, and the families working with them cooperatively, and we'll take care of those. So we will close early, because we understand that we can be very stressful. Our services can be very stressful to families. They can be intrusive. So we want to get out of those families' lives as soon as we can. So in those situations, that's a discussion between the worker, supervisor, and those services about closing. So there has to be no recent occurrences of child abuse or maltreatment. There's no evidence of current or imminent safety threats. A recent risk assessment confirms that factors that were identified as contributing towards risk in the earlier risk assessment documents no longer exist, or have been reduced significantly enough that they no longer pose concerns to the direct safety or well-being of the child. At the time of termination of services, the family should be able to demonstrate specific and measurable behavioral improvements in the area identified in the service plan, and the ability to access and use formal and informal resources to assist them in problem solving. So prior to closing the family file, the worker, child and family wellbeing worker, will have one last visit you'll get a letter. You should get a letter from that worker saying that we're closing the file. And, you know, that if other information comes in, then we may need to come out and do another, open it up and do another investigation, but we hope not, and we just move on. And we're here to support families too. So I do know that we've closed some files, and that family member will call us and say, you know, I need some support in this area. Can you help me? And we don't turn our backs on those families. We said, yes, we're going to help you, and we're going to either get them what they need or make those referrals for them to help them out. But you know, every case is unique, and you know, we're most workers and supervisors. We're human beings, and we make mistakes. Sometimes we do the wrong thing, and it's up to us to own that with families and to correct those mistakes and work with the families to get things back on track. You know, most situations are pretty simple, and we get through them pretty easily. There's very few are the difficult situations. But you know, we really appreciate families when they work with us. They're honest with us because we'll be honest with you, and we move forward. And I know one of the strongest fears sometimes I hear is, well, I don't want you taking my kids. Well, that doesn't cross. That's not the first thing that crosses supervisor or worker's mind. It's how can we help? It's quite the opposite. How can we help to provide services so your children are kept safe, right? So it's really important. And I get it. Maybe you don't want to access the child and well-being workers service so much. You might feel more comfortable with an NOSHE or with the Decolonizing program or a family violence worker. And so we'll get that for you. And that can happen. Or go to the lodge, you know, those kinds of things. So, and keeping kids out of care is our main goal, to be honest with you, to keep them out of care and keep them with family. We've had so many situations of late that where kids are being, family are stepping up and taking kids in First Nations. I had a wonderful picture of sent to me by the band liaison from way up north, sent me a picture of a young girl we sent up back home that they took. And she went out moose hunting with her family, and it was very nice to see. Like it was like she fit in there, like that was her, right? You know, so that's the nice part, the real nice part. The one final thing I will say, and maybe Miguel wants to jump in, but I used to do in the youth program, we used to go whitewater canoeing, and I went on one trip. I went on, and this young person I was with, you know, was standing watching these waterfalls, and I said, so how you feeling? Like, what's going on? What's going through your mind, eh? He says to me, he goes, you know what I love about being in the bush? You can just be you. You can just do what you want. You can just be out here and enjoy life. And I think, you know, that hit home to me to say that a lot of these kids and families, they need that. They need to go there. They need to be in that place. And that's our goal here, to make sure that that really happens. And Miguel and I have been working together for a while. I don't know if you want to say anything else, Miguel.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. I you know, hearing you talk, I thought about, you know, the definition of, you know, what does it mean to be a child and family well-being worker? And you know, we used to have the title of child protection worker, and then, you know, when we had several meetings with our community and the community members, we decided to change our title and call ourselves child and family wellbeing workers, because I think it's really important to highlight that when a family is open with an ongoing worker, we do our collaboration with that family is so much more than just protection. I mean, I can speak personally, you know, with so many families that I've worked with throughout the years, that we have had, you know, home visits that consisted of, you know, going shopping together, visiting family members, you know, connecting with family members who live in different provinces or different countries. We've helped families move into new homes. We've helped connect them with collaterals in the community. So for me, it's really important to recognize that the work that we do is such a collaboration with the family. And I think when, Jamie, you mentioned when we're working with a specific family, it really is such an individual and unique experience with that specific family. And it's not going to be the same for every other family that we work with, even if the referral or the concerns are the same. And I think it helps when, you're able to establish a relationship with the family and come together and realize, okay, what can we do so that the file can be closed with protection? But we never really, here at Native Child, I see so many people that come in that I have worked with in the past, and we still have a relationship, even though the file has been closed. So I just wanted to mention that, it is definitely a unique experience here at Native Child, and working with our families is an honor.
Yeah, just to add to that, Miguel, I would say that the one thing that we do practice here is to really rely on families to tell us and give us feedback and tell us what they can do and how they can do things. And it's not us telling them. And if they feel like they want to, it's okay. They want to go, they want to do this, they want to go to ceremony, they want to need somebody, something like that, then that's fine for us. And we're okay with that. We're kind of open-minded to most things that families will want to practice, and that's fine. And we offer those things. We offer those things. So
yes, 100%.
Maybe I should tell the story about you out in Oshawa. You mind?
No, you can go ahead and say it.
So Miguel's on his own time in Oshawa at a Walmart shopping, and somebody walks up behind him and slaps him in his bum pretty hard. He turns around, and it's a family that he used to work with.
Yeah.
And it's the mother or the grandmother, and Miguel says to her, "Oh, you can't do that. You can't do that here." And she just smiles at him and walks up. So, I think that this is very telling of the relationships we have with these people. We become family, we become their family in most cases, and they rely on us to help and advocate and those things. And that's something we try to really do. Sometimes we can't tell the community everything about every situation that we're dealing with because of confidentiality, and that's difficult. So, you'll see, sometimes people with the community, people will get upset because they think we're doing something, but, I think because of confidential, we can't say that, but that's where the talking circle is very helpful, I find, where we can be respectful and honest in that circle.
Yeah, 100%. I agree.
Well, Jamie and Miguel, I want to thank you guys both so much. I thought this was so informative, really interesting. You brought a lot of your spirit to the presentation. I just want to, again, remind folks in the audience, I see a couple questions in the Q&A, but Jamie and Miguel will be sticking around and we'll be happy to answer questions when we get to the end of our presentation. But coming up next, I'd like to introduce Mark Atanasoff, Director of Quality Assurance and Decolonization. Welcome, Mark. How are you today?
Doing great, Terry. Thank you for the introduction. And thank you, Miguel and Jamie, for walking us through a very complex system. So I'm going to change gears a little bit. I'm not going to spend too much time on this piece, but we're doing the learning series and we're bringing very complex systems to community. And it's going to take quite a while for us to go through all the services that we provide to community and explaining those standards and the tools that Jamie and Miguel have mentioned. But we also want to make the system accessible to folks. So part of the work that we're also doing is trying to look at decolonizing child welfare. And so I'm going to just take a little moment to sort of pivot to some of the policy considerations and processes. And we're trying to simplify very complex systems because we do want to continue the conversation with community in different arenas. So if you go to the next slide, this is our current thinking. And we wanted to, we don't want to wait to explain our current thinking. We want to have the conversation with community as it's going. But, one of the things that's sticking out for us is that this reducing stigma. We're still in a process of reconciling child welfare with community. And we know that's not easy given the history. And so, we're working to revision child welfare, and we see the services that we offer as child and family well-being, but we see it as part of a healing journey. We see it as a resource for families. And so, we want to look at removing the shame and the re-traumatization, and really unpack that with community and really own this journey with community, and develop co-develop where we want to go together. And so we know these are challenging conversations. And so, this is we have the learning series, but we're still going to continue to have these conversations in pockets all over around the city. And so we're just acknowledging the work that we still have to do. So that's one of the pillars that we sort of want to unpack with community. The next one is we're really excited about this one in terms of some of the thinking from a policy level, but seeing community programs as a system. And everybody's focused on child welfare, but as you kind of unpack that beast, we're seeing that when we look at community programs, just not at Native Child in terms of our holistic programs, but all across all the task member agencies, that if this is the system that probably needs to reform, where if we can act together with mental health, addictions, poverty, and look at things from a community standpoint, we strongly believe that if we could reduce poverty, addictions, and mental health at the community level, you're going to see a vast reduction in the use of child welfare services and other services as well. So we're really excited about working with our community partners to look at the opportunities to integrate within a broader system to look at some of the structural issues in community and really tackle that and look at the funding opportunities and all those options that we can do there. So we're really excited about having those conversations with folks as well. And then when you look at the child welfare reform, we want to unpack that, and it's a really complex system. But when we look at child welfare, we want to look at experiences when folks have to touch the system. And Jamie and Miguel have mentioned it, and all their good relations they have with community. But this is where we want folks to feel listened to. We want them to feel partnered with. We want them to feel that they're experts in their own lives. And so it really comes down to when folks do touch the child welfare system, that there's dignity and respect in it. And so we really want to unpack that experience and really making sure that it's the best possible experience, and then connecting folks to those community programs as a system and really looking at this as a collaborative, integrated approach. So we're really excited about some of the opportunities that we're seeing. If you go to the next page. Just in some of the granular stuff that we're looking at, I mean, one of the things that we want to do and what we have done is really ground ourselves in the Indigenous worldview, because that from there, creating that foundation, it really influences the whole system, right? And that's where we want to have those conversations with community and staff and all our stakeholders. But one of the things that we found interesting is these tools that we keep on hearing about in our first learning series and now in this one, is you hear about the risk assessment, the safety, the strengths and needs, parenting capacity assessments. And, so when we look at those things, have those tools been validated by community? Are they even Indigenous in origin? And so these are the conversations that we want to have with community and co-develop these tools to work for our community, looking at well-being tools. And so we want to unpack those together. And so we see this as a great opportunity of co-development. The next one is best interest of the child. And so these are the things that, maybe not reside in tools, but this is the stuff that is passionate to us, and this is our culture. What is the impact there when we make decisions? Our language, love, connection to family, connection to community. We look at the best interest of a 7-year-old child, but does the system look at that child at 17, 27, 77? Does it have a holistic view? And we want to unpack that as well. And the last one here is like decisions. And so when we make decisions, whether to investigate, to transfer to ongoing, to do alternative placements for children, how is that grounded? And we want to make sure that that's, we have the best possible process for that. It's fully fully resourced, but it also, all these systems need to be validated by community, because we're a community mandated organization, and all these things need to be vetted and validated by community. And because we're a system, when we act as a system, there's going to always be exceptions. And is the system robust enough to have checks and balances? And so those have to be there as well. And the last two here is like the experience touch points. Every time we knock on the door and we work with families, and you heard it from Miguel and Jamie, it's those experiences of how we treat folks is so important, right? And so we feel that that's really a big key of the work that we do. And we really want to unpack that and make sure that there's no folks slip through the gaps, and everybody's treated with respect and integrity. And so we really want to unpack that as an opportunity for the system. And the last one, though, is involved community programs. And so when we do connect families to those resources of, we mentioned holistic services or external resources, does that have an impact of, can we close cases? Can we transfer accountability? Can we work with a system that's bigger than just child welfare and focused on well-being? And we think the answer is yes. And we think that we could dramatically change the numbers, dramatically improve outcomes by looking at our community partners and really developing like a common referral system and really integrating the system and really looking at well-being. So this is a couple of the high level stuff that we're working on. And as we move farther into our conversations, we think some of these pillars are really good conversation points where we can really further the dialogue with our stakeholders and community. So this is just a quick overview, and we're still unpacking this. So we're learning a lot as well as we go through the learning series. So we're really excited about bringing our thinking to community. That's it for me there, Terry.
Well, thank you, Mark. Thank you, Mark. I really like this this last slide, sort of taking all of these different types of tools and pieces from the system and then looking at it through the lens of an Indigenous worldview. I think there's a really great conversation that can be had further to this. Kind of looking forward to having that. So I'm now looking for, and I believe she's here, Vivian. And we brought in Vivian to open the meeting, but we always like to go back to Vivian and listen to some of her wisdom. There she is.
Oh, I'm here. I've been paying attention.
Any thoughts on today's presentation?
Yeah, I was listening through the whole process of Miguel talking about his where it all begins, his initial referral, the spectrum, the risk assessments, the providing ongoing support. That's a big one. And I've heard a lot of talk from Jamie about his process as well. But I did have a couple of questions myself, regarding some of the process, only because service plans are put in place and they're worked out with the family. At that point, is it okay to have, you don't have to answer me right now. Is it okay to have, say, this mother is there, she's being investigated there, and they're looking at putting a service plan to have it going. Can she have like a friend sit with her? Like she might want to know, because she might not always have the skills to understand what's going on, So sometimes they need somebody around them to help them understand that whole process. An investigation, how long does an investigation last? Is it that one visit? Is it the whole week? Is it a month? Those kind of things. I understand children's under 12, they're visited every week. And a worker has supervision every 6 weeks, even though it's a lot more than that. Sometimes almost every day. I know I used to bug my supervisor, hey, used to ask her questions all the time. Support. When we talk about when a child comes into care, sometimes there's not always like aunties or uncles or older siblings. So a lot of times we put children with grandparents. And what I found over the years is we don't really have any supports for grandparents. Where's the supports for grandparents? We want, because they're the ones that are going to be taking care of the kids. So those are just some of my questions I have, but I really like the cultural pieces that we're throwing into our work. Putting cultural pieces into the service plan. Maybe the mom wants to know, how long is that service plan? Is it for a month? Is it like a couple months? Is it for a year? Like sometimes these files stay open for a long time. As long as we explain it well to them, that we explain well and they understand what's going on. Yeah, that's all I really have to say about what I've heard going on. It's an ongoing process. It's a lot to learn. It's a lot to take and give. So working side by side with our families is key role into our work in helping them on that healing journey. Megan, that's all I had to say about what I've heard today. Yeah, and I'll turn it back over to you, Terry.
Oh, lovely. Thank you, Vivian. Always love listening to your perspective. You have such a great way of taking all of the conversations and then really grounding it in what really matters, right? Which what I heard is just making sure that there's community supports and that community members understand the journey. Like we say, I want to say, I know we believe it. We're walking the journey with community. So just making sure that they really are understanding all those pieces, right? It's so intricate, which I think is one of the parts that I admire about Jamie and Miguel, all the different pieces that you talked about, the service planning and all that real technical work. It's so important to ensure safety, but then making sure community understands it. So I found today really, really interesting. We have a couple questions in the chat, and I'm going to, I think, direct this first one to Mark and then open it up to the panel to see if there's any further feedbacks. And someone's just asking if we could clarify how moving towards decolonizing practice and the TRC recommendations, and we are aware there are a number of recommendations in the calls to action specifically to child welfare work in Canada. So how is this discussion working towards achieving those recommendations? And then, you know, are we working, I guess, you know, on improving, adjusting, and building upon our existing practice with those goals in mind?
The TRC, those are actions against government. So we want to make sure government has a voice in that because those ones were challenged to the government. For us, I mean, I'm looking at this as we have a relationship with community and how we change our practices to include community and co-development. And I think that's why the pillars that we had there and the conversations that are needed. So like with tool development, you know, have they been brought to community? Do we want to throw those tools out? Do we want to create new tools? Do we want to create well-being tools? Are those tools biased? Are those tools, current tools, is there discrimination in those tools? Those are the things that we want to unpack, right? And so, you know, we'll have assumptions about those tools. And so those are the things that we need to co-develop with community and they need to be brought to community and discussed. So that's one for the tools. When we look at things like culture, removing a child from a family, from a community, looking at the child, not just at 7, but at 77, that holistic perspective, you know, is that in our practice? We want to unpack that. And so even though we may have beliefs of what we think we do and don't do, it needs to be validated by community. So these are the conversations and the time that we have to put in to doing that. And then because we are a system, there is going to be needs for checks and balances because there are going to be, as Jamie has identified, there's going to be mistakes along the way. And so, you know, how do we have those checks and balances within a system where folks don't fall through the gaps and there's barriers to good service, right? And same thing with experiences. We want folks who touch, you know, this service. We know the historical injustices. We know there was no good experiences from the past. And so we want to take that time and build those relationships so people feel heard and listened to, and they're the experts in their own lives and they're partnered with. And so those things we need to unpack. And so those are the things we want to make the investments in so that when a family is traversing the system, they get to give their feedback. They don't have to wait 30 years for an inquest or a tribunal. They can give their feedback so we can grow as an organization and listen and make better systems and make better processes, get training out there. And so really be responsive to community. I mean, I can go on and on and on. But we're starting a very difficult conversation. And so we're going into this really authentically. And that's why we really want to continue this dialogue. I can go on and on, but I'll stop here and let others speak as well. But we're going into this in a way that we want to acknowledge success because we do think that there's a lot of it. But then there's little tweaks that we want to make and those continuous improvements. But then we know there's room for radical innovation and disruption. And we want to do those things as well, right? And so all that's going to take time, but it's going to take relationships and conversation. So we have a long journey ahead of us in this process.
Yeah, we do, 100%. I'll just jump in too, Mark. I mean, you're right. The first 5 calls to the TRC, I mean, they directly refer to child welfare, and they do directly, call out all 3 levels of government, right? And even though they don't call out agencies, I do think it's important to acknowledge that we have done some work to try to help advocate for those changes. Like one of the calls is to fully implement Jordan's principal funding, for example, and we certainly have come together with other Indigenous agencies to advocate for that to happen. They talk about more data transparency. They talk about developing programming for Indigenous families, and so we're doing our best to respond to those calls. With other agencies to try to move that work forward. But I think what you said is really important in terms of. I think we found in a lot of our conversations with community, there wasn't a good understanding of the current work that happens at Native Child. And so what we wanted to do was build a foundation of understanding to move that conversation forward. So this learning series was meant to sort of talk about what happens at Native Child right now across the whole service perspective. And that will lead to future conversations around how we can continue to change the system. But I'm reminded as we talk about this, about this teaching I heard from an elder once, and who said, Jeff, if it takes 30 days to walk into the bush, how long does it take to walk out of the bush, right? And I thought that was a trick answer. I was really thinking about it for a long time. I wanted to say 25 or 40 or maybe 100, but he said no, 30. If it takes 30 days to walk into the bush, it takes 30 days to walk out of the bush, and really. Child welfare has detrimentally impacted Indigenous communities for a long, long time. If you connect it to the deeper history of residential schooling, it's been well over 100 years, right? It's been a long, long time. Native Child has had a mandate for child welfare for 18 years. We can't expect to undo a century of harm in 5 years or 10 years or 18 years or 20, right? So I think this learning series is really about talking about the way that we have showcased, or the way that we have created changes to date, and there have been good changes, but also about acknowledging the fact that there's more work to be done, right? And we want to do that work together with community and with stakeholders. And so I think we hope that through all of these modules, we'll be able to get on the same page to kind of understand the current state. And we've been doing that for quite some time, right? We don't have too much time to get into it today, and I know that there's other questions, but after our first 10 years of child welfare, we held a process of reconciliation with community, where we said to community, hey, we've done this work for 10 years. What's going well? What's not going well? What do we need? That's the process. And Jamie was around. I wasn't around for that. Jamie was around for that. But that was the process that did things like give rise to our client bill of rights. That's the process that led to our generic model of child and family well-being workers, where in almost every other agency across the province, workers just do a tiny little piece of the process. They don't walk the entire journey. Our staff at Native Child do the whole thing, right? Community say we want 1 worker, not 5. So we've been changing in response to community as we've sort of walked this journey. Unquestionably, there's much more work that can be done. And I do think that the best sources of innovation are the community members who are accessing that service, and our staff who are doing it, and who many of them are community members themselves who are doing that work on a daily basis. So I don't think this process assumes that decolonization is done. I mean, that's not a box that you can check. It's a process that never finishes. But it's kind of showcasing where we are right now, and setting the stage for future conversations and work together with community. Yeah. I don't know if anyone else wants to say anything else around that, Terry, or if we want to move on.
I'll leave it to the panel. I thought there's a second question that I think just kind of goes really nicely with where this first question landed. So thank you, Mark and Jeffrey. And the next question I think probably is more for Vivian and Jamie. And that's around the participation of social workers and elders, knowledge keepers in these conversations. And so, around decolonizing. And Jamie, and maybe we'll start with the social workers, Jamie and Miguel. Did you have any thoughts around decolonizing through the lens of a social worker?
That's a good question, but I think what we do rely on are people like Vivian to talk to about certain situations. Hey, Vivian. And looking at different ways of dealing with different situations that takes. Like for me, I mean, I would love to go to a ceremony. I'd love to sit in the sweat with families that I work with or know of, and deal with things through ceremony. I think that's important. I like the talking circle. I like those things. So I think social work has taken a different perspective that way. You know, the old social workers are like, well, you can't hug a family, you can't hug a person, you can't, you know, you can't help them, you can't do this, you can't do that. And that's changed here. As far as I know, it's changing here. It has changed. So.
Mhm. I agree with you, Jamie. I agree with you a lot. You know, I still attend ceremonies. You know, I attend community events. When I do, though, it's on my own personal time. You know, sometimes I'll run into somebody that I've worked with in the past and they'll get upset, you know, that I didn't say hello. And then they let me know, it's okay if you want to say hello. So I'll say hello, but I just let them know, we can't talk about anything that happened in the past. We're allowed to talk about today, like how is today? You know, the sun is shining today. How are you? You're in good health, you know, just basic everyday things that we ask one another. So in regards to like hugging and touching, we don't do a lot of that, only because pandemic right now. You give the elbow. You give the elbow right now, you know. But yeah, it is hard, you know, because back when I was doing my healing journey many years ago, you know, our counselors and our elders brought us. They brought us to that ceremony. They sat with us. They picked us up. They brought us back. They fed us. And now it's so different. But we need to put those practices in place again. We need to bring those back and being able to work with our clients and helping them through all that cultural stuff. We need to do that. So we're gonna figure it out. We're gonna do it. We're gonna get there. And because that's where the healing takes place, is being able to do all that. Having those talking circles is a huge one. You know, we should be having one at Native Child, or we should be having one in the community, outside the community somewhere. But we should start putting in those cultural things. Yeah, just being upfront with the client. That's all you have to do, is just be upfront with them. I can't talk about, you know, what's going on when we were worker client in the office kind of thing. As long as we explain, we'll be okay. Somebody's question, whoever it was.
Thank you,
If
Vivian.
Jamie, you want to add further, I'm okay with that.
No, I appreciate that. You're right. And I believe in that too. I believe in that. You know, we need to be upfront, honest with people and let people know things in a good way. So.
Mhm.
And I just want to add that I think it's okay, like when you're looking at the whole concept of decolonizing child welfare and where, you know, where do social workers fit in, but I think it's okay to ask questions, and it's okay to let a family know that if you don't know the answer, you're going to find out. And as a child and family wellbeing worker, I think it's important to take the time to try and attend as many trainings, as many cultural trainings as possible, not only within the agency, but also, you know, we go into families' homes all the time. We sit with them in their living rooms, we sit with them in their kitchens. And if those families talk to us about their individual cultural ceremonies, it's sitting there and being present with the family. And it's okay to ask questions if you don't understand something. It's okay to let the family know that you are interested in learning. And I think, you know, for myself, you know, being an ally and being a non-Indigenous child and family wellbeing worker in an Indigenous agency, that is a huge piece for me. And just being open to people and open to their experience is very important.
Thanks, Miguel. Thanks, Miguel. And thank you, Vivian and Jamie. I think the next question, this is a good question. It's a little bit of a challenging question because it's part of a challenging topic, and that is really about decolonization. Like, I don't think that these conversations are always going to be entirely comfortable. But you know, we know that Indigenous people are known to come under the radar at a much higher rate than non-Indigenous people within CAS. Non-Indigenous person File may not be open, while a Native person's file will be open for the same incident or concern. How is decolonizing practice ensuring racism, prejudice, and bias are not a part of the process?
It's a good question, right? And when you look at the data, you still see when you look at the data, you still see Indigenous people way overrepresented in the child welfare system. And I think this is where it's really interesting to look at. There are places in Ontario, service geographies in Ontario, where there's no Indigenous organization, and that work is being done by mainstream organizations because an Indigenous organization doesn't exist. And if you look at social work in those areas where Indigenous folk are being serviced by a mainstream agency, and then you compare that to service areas where there are Indigenous agencies, you see a difference. You see a difference because of the service model, right? And certainly there's always room for improvement. But when we implement this multi-service sort of integrated culture-based service model like we have at Native Child, we start to see less. We see less of an overrepresentation. But I mean, this is a better question for Vivian and Jamie and Miguel who are doing the work. Do you guys want to comment on what this looks like on a daily basis?
Well, the thing is, we need to, the social worker, like the frontline worker, like Miguel and I would be discussing this ongoing. And we understand that those concerns, we understand that those things can happen. So we're aware of that. And we try to, plus I know I know many of the families we work with. So sometimes it's just a phone call to check in and say, instead of doing a full blown open up an investigation, just call in and check in with the family. Everything okay? You doing okay? You doing well? Need anything? And that's pretty simple, right? I get that. So we're well aware of that. Well aware of that.
Me, I'm going to speak from my Shnabekwe, Dao. And when I came into work in the child welfare system, that was difficult. I'm clearly visible. I'm clearly visible of who I am. Like even me going to work in the community was often difficult. Sometimes I'd walk into the school and they would ask me at the front desk, are you a parent? It's like, yes, I am a parent, but that is not what I'm here for. I'd pull out my badge and this is who I am. Working with my community was very hard as well. I had community members who wanted to just make trouble for me. Sometimes they wanted to report me to the Ontario School of Social Workers, they were just mad. But there's times when I had to stand on my feet. It's like I didn't do anything wrong. So I didn't do anything wrong. And I know that. But sometimes we will get trouble from the people we work with. But as long as we can stand with kindness, we can get through this. Kindness is a big step. It's really, and being honest. I've had people, yell when I go over. But I'd say, if you're going to yell at me, it's like, we're not going to have a good conversation. It's just being authentic in our work. Authentic, and it's hard. I'm saying it's very hard as an Indigenous woman working in the community. So I have to stand strong on my feet. Sometimes they might come up myself as I didn't even know the right words to describe it, but I'm going to continue doing the work. I dedicated myself to working in this agency. I've been here since 2010. And working with our people is difficult, but as long as we all educate one another, work with one another, teamwork with one another is really important. Like I've heard you say those initials again. You can't do those initials when we're talking. I heard TRC. What is TRC? you have new workers coming to Native Child and Family Services, say the full name, please. So we got to work with one another. That's key role in our community, working with our community. Yeah, Migna, that's my little 2 cents. Oops, my cat is making noise in the back there. Sorry.
Thank you, Vivian. And I think, Mark, you had some comments that you wanted to add to this question.
Yeah, and I think those are great answers, and I think that there's a lot to unpack there as well. I mean, just from the policy level, I mean, this is why it's like, I think there's a stat out there that, if there's a referral against you, and then there's an investigation, and then it goes to ongoing, and then there's, child, at every single incident, there's a higher rate for Indigenous folks in that chain across Canada. So that's the stat there, right? And so we want to unpack that. But that's why when we go back to those pillars, those referral sources can be biased. So they call in, the tools could be biased, decisions can be biased, right? So just understanding that aspect of the work that allows that decolonization. So how can we redo the tools? What's the training around decisions, or what's that approach? Referral sources, can we work with professionals to identify those biases, right? There's so many opportunities to look at the system and work with all the partners that interact with that. And so those are the opportunities that we can have. Then the other bucket that's missed is that child at 77, taking in that holistic decision, or, looking at, family and community and that dislocation, including that into the decision. So all these pieces, need to be unpacked when it comes to that racism that's in the system. And that's why it's so important that we take this back to community. So we take tools back to community. We take how the decision apparatus. Then the other thing that's important is checks and balances. And so when there are mistakes in the system, what are the checks and balances? And are those checks and balances Indigenous? Like Vivian mentioned, knowledge keepers and circles, and bringing those back. And so when it comes down to decisions, I mean, this is you can look at innovations, but do we need a grandmother's council, right? And we'll unpack that. But they're underneath all of these conversations that we have with community. Underpinning all this is the Indigenous ways of knowing, and making sure those are the system. And that's the conversation that we need to have with community, and unpack all these systems and really make sure that there's that aspect in the work. So that's what I'm saying. This is a long conversation, and we need to involve community, and we need to involve staff. And there's a lot of opportunities here to make the system reflect what the community wants, and do that co-development.
Thank you, Mark. I see we're getting close to time. We do have a couple questions, and I'm noticing the couple of questions we have are from Native Child staff, and your questions are really valuable too. But one of the parts that we didn't really talk about this today, but all these different ways that we're engaging, and all the different ways that we're trying to work collaboratively with many circles to address these important issues and what needs to be changed or transformed in the system. We have this learning series with community advisory, and there's a staff advisory. So I just asked the staff, for the sake of time, if you could save your questions for the staff advisory process, and we can work through them in that space. Really appreciate that, because I want to just give the last couple minutes to anyone in the panel who feels maybe that there was just one final thought. And then we'll turn it to you, Vivian, for your final thoughts and closing.
I'll just say real quick, there was one question, someone asked a clarifying question about, I think it was about the extent to which we include elders and knowledge keepers at our leadership table, and in that process, I answered it through typing. I just do want to clarify. I mean, it's important for everyone to know that this agency really was founded by elders and knowledge keepers and community leaders, right? They're the ones that created our service model through 4 days of ceremony, and it's absolutely required of us. It's part of our accountability to the community that they continue to guide our ongoing process and development and our growth. So we do have our elders and knowledge keepers sitting at our senior leadership table, which meets every week. I meet personally. I have a standing meeting regularly with our internal elders and knowledge keepers. We include them in our strategic planning process. And we would not be able to do the work that we did in a good way, grounded in our values, without their continuous involvement. And so I did want to share that before we turn things over to Vivian Miigwech. Mm-hmm. On mute. You're on mute, Terry.
Had to do it. Someone had to do it once, right? Just was seeing if Mark or Jamie had any final thoughts. Yeah, This was a good conversation. It went by quickly today. I really enjoyed listening. I learned a lot. I learned so much every time we get together. So I want to appreciate, I appreciate all the panelists, all of our background, tech supports, the communications team, culture team, IT, all the folks that help bring everybody together today. And then our audience, all the participants that are here. These learning series are recorded. And they are available to be watched on our website as well. So if you want to go back and check in on any part of it, or if you have a friend who you think might enjoy learning a little bit more about how Native Child and Family Services practices child and family well-being, then please go to our website and have a look at the previous sessions as well as today's. And I think that's everything. We'll be meeting again in a couple months. You'll all be invited to talk about it's family finding. I hope I'm right. It's family finding. That's our next part of the learning series. It's just amazing innovation and really, really great team of people. So I'm already looking forward to that. So miigwech everyone. And Vivian, final thoughts from, I wanted to say one thing because you're talking about kindness and standing in kindness, and that I see in you as your strength. You know, you're such a strong person, but it's that kindness that makes you super strong.
Oh, thank you. Sometimes I look like this. Just kidding. Gotta throw. Sorry, you gotta throw a little humor there. Sorry, guys, but I really liked what I heard today. It was great, and it's a good start. Jeff talked about including knowledge keepers and senior leadership. We do meet with Jeff too individually, and it's a good beginning. It's a really good beginning, and I'm invited out to a lot of our teams. I enjoy that part of my work, but there's a lot more that we can be involved in as knowledge keepers of the agencies, like hiring practices, for example. There's a lot more that we could be a part of, but it's a start, and I really like that, and I'm grateful for that. So I'm going to go ahead and close with thanking our Creator for everything He has given us. Chimiigwech webnado kinige go amijiang. Chimiigwech tego iwis niang nangwa. Chimiigwech tego wen nebi emnakoyang nangwa. Mina kinodigego etek inakasyang chimiigwech tego. Mina gondak nenok mina koyok mumpia nam the bot. Busedmin kinige. Thank you, Creator, for all you have given us today. Thank you for the water that we drink today. Thank you for the food that we eat. Thank you for all that is out there. And I also thank you for all my coworkers as well as we sit in this meeting, giving gratitude. And for that, I am very grateful. Miigwech wemnado. Thank you.
Vivian, thank you. And thank you everybody for joining us today. We'll see you again soon. Stay well and enjoy the almost spring.